All right, so we're going to read 18, 19, and 20 to finish out this week. And that's your assignment to read through 20, right? All right. So starting with chapter 18. As they both had two big things happen here. We had Ava who tried to use her powers and it didn't work, got humiliated. And now Layla has figured out her power, but I want to know who that belongs to. I want to know. Let me turn my fan down. I've cooled down from the walk now. Okay. As soon as class ended, Ava held an emergency meeting back in her room with Layla and Arnold. They huddled together on the floor, the door closed as Ava told them what had happened. Well, at least Fia knows who her monster ancestor is now, Layla said. Her brown hair was turning orange, and Ava wondered if she might transform into Fia out of sympathy. A chimera? Ava said. Or chimera. Again, I gotta look these up. This is terrible. I need to know how to say these, don't I? The chimera were part lion, part goat, and part serpent, and was the only monster that breathed fire. It makes sense now that she was never afraid of Mr. Hef's forge and doesn't seem to like water. Fire breathing is a cool power, Arnold said with a sigh. But Fia's going to have to do a lot of work to learn how to control it, Layla said. Ava checked the time. It was nearly 4 p.m., over an hour since Miss Cleo had sent Fia to Mr. Orion's office. This has got to be a second strike. She did nearly roast a teacher, Layla said. Who nearly clobbered her with a desk, Ava said. Miss Cleo would never really harm a student, Layla said. But Ava didn't feel quite as sure. I should have answered Miss Cleo's question about harpies. They never would have gotten into that fight. Don't beat yourself up, Layla said. It would have happened eventually. It's just that I was upset because Ava had left out this part of the story. But if her friends didn't know already what she was, they would likely be hearing it soon. Ava took a deep breath. You know Morgan and Anahita, their second years? Arnold groaned. You mean the ones who like to drown people? Arnold had to be fished out of a whirlpool by Miss Doris the second day of school, Layla explained. Try being on the swim team with them, Ava said. We got into a fight and they called me Gorgon Girl. Zale called me the same thing when Athena came. Kids call one another all sorts of names, Layla said. But if you haven't developed any powers, that's the thing, Ava said quietly. I did. Once. Anyway, I froze a boy. Arnold's eyes widened. So you think you are really... I know I am, Ava said. I'm related to Medusa. Athena confirmed it, and my mom too. I was afraid to tell you. You shouldn't have been, Layla said with a grin. I would have just asked you to freeze me in one of my better looks. At least she has good humor about it, right? Ha, Ava said, but she was relieved that Layla didn't seem upset to learn she was rooming with a Gorgon. Could you freeze Zale? Arnold asked. Pretty please? Ava sighed. That's the thing. I can't freeze anyone now. I couldn't even freeze Morgan and Anahita. That's a good thing, Layla said. You probably would have gotten a strike for attacking other students. My mom would have definitely have been unhappy about that, Ava said, sharing what she had told Ava in Rome. Maybe you can control your power now, Arnold added. But I was trying to use it, not control it. Before she could say more, the door flung open and Fia rushed in. They all sprang to their feet and surrounded her. What happened? Ava asked. Fia grinned. Mr. Orion gave me a second strike and this big, long lecture. Told me, now that I know I'm a chimera, I have no more excuses not to behave, that this was my last chance, yada yada. Ava was relieved Fia was in high spirits, but she couldn't help feeling worried by how close Fia was to getting to expulsion. Yeah, she doesn't seem very worried, does she? Ava told us about being a Gorgon, Arnold said. And you're a chimera, and I keep going back and forth between chimera and chimera. Chimera. And once again, I'm nothing. Oh, Arnold, Layla said, you'll develop your powers eventually. And maybe they'll even work more than once, Ava said. Then she filled in Fia on what had happened at the pool. Doesn't mean you don't have them, Fia said when Ava had finished. Maybe you just weren't angry enough. Or you were holding back because of your mom. Anyway, I have something really important to tell you, something that might help you learn what happened to her at the academia. What? Ava asked. Zale came by when Mr. Orion was chewing me out. They left me in the office to talk outside, and I noticed Mr. Orion's file cabinet was slightly open. So I looked inside. There were a bunch of files, one for every single student, current and past. They include our family tree going all the way back to our monster ancestor. Zale could have easily taken a peek at her file. Jax had been right. But that's not even the interesting part, Fia continued. The files also contain a write up of every time a student gets in trouble, a full behavioral record. She clapped her hands in excitement. Do you know what that means? Ava breathed, breath quickened. I could read my mom's. Exactly. You can find out what happened to her. But we'd have to break into Mr. Orion's office. We? Ava interrupted. You're one strike away from getting expelled. Ava's right, Layla said. You'd be breaking a ton of rules. Fia shrugged. Ava deserves some answers, and those records are the way to get them. Which is why I should break in, Ava said. Not you. I have no strikes, a clean record. If I get caught, it'll be a first offense. But I know where everything is, Fia said. I'm the only one who's been in Orion's office. No, Ava said. It's too much of a risk. This just sounds like a bad idea no matter who does it, Layla said. Ava, you're doing a great job here. You're Miss Cleo's favorite. Why jeopardize that? Layla's hair was turning from orange to white. Arnold, tell them. They're just going to get caught. She turned to Arnold, but to Ava's surprise, he looked down at his feet. Arnold, Layla said, don't tell me you're... I may never develop any powers, he said with a sigh, but if I see my family tree, I can at least find out what I am. Ah! Layla threw her hands in the air. I'm not going with you. You don't have to, Ava said. Arnold and I will go, and you can stay out of it. Just don't tell anyone. Of course I won't tell, Layla grumbled. But I will say I told you so when you end up in a mountain of trouble. Should they do this? No. There are other ways to find this out, not breaking into the headmaster's office and looking through files. Oy vey. Okay. 19. They planned the break-in for the first night of carnival. Oh, they're going through with it. Oh, snap. Chapter 19, first sentence. Ava had never celebrated this holiday back home in America, but Layla explained that the festive run-up to Lent was a huge deal in Venice, and begrudgingly suggested it would be the safest night for mischief. Tours poured into the city to dress up in masks and costumes and to stroll the streets or party along the Grand Canal. There were fancy balls and competitions for the best costume, outdoor bands and parades. Even the academia took part in carnival, which Miss Cleo pointed out had pre-Christian origins in the celebration of winter's end and the coming of spring. Mr. Orion held a masquerade ball for the entire school, and this year he planned to personally chaperone the event. Best of all, instead of in the Great Hall, the ball was being held on the top floor in Miss Atalantia's rooftop gym. She had allowed Miss Terpsichore, the muse of dance, to turn it into a glass-enclosed panoramic disco. This meant the party would take place as far away as possible from Mr. Orion's office. On the morning of the ball, they picked out carnival masks at the school store. They purposely stuck to the most popular choices. Fia chose the black and white mask of Harlequin, the crafty mime. Arnold chose a long, curved beak, which made him look like a bird, although Layla said it was the mask worn by medieval plague doctors. Layla herself wore a volto, or ghost mask, which was white with red painted lips. Ava already had the cat mask she'd bought with her mom. Later that evening, the girls paired their masks with colorful floor-length ball gowns they had rented at the store. Fia's green, Layla's gold, and Ava's blue. I wish I could change the color of my hair like you, Fia said to Layla as she inspected herself in the mirror. You can, Layla said. It's called hair dye. Layla was grumpy, but at least she seemed to realize that she couldn't talk them out of their plan. Fia, on the other hand, was so excited that tiny sparks kept shooting out from behind her mask. She carefully positioned a black veil over her orange hair. It's like being friends with a sparkler, Layla grumbled, because she's so excited she keeps sparking Fire, right? That's so funny. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. What? Layla shouted. The door opened and Arnold's enormous beak poked through the opening. He had added a brown, broad brimmed hat. Let me try that again. He added a broad brimmed black hat and a cape, which he attempted to sweep around himself dramatically, but instead tripped over. Ava hoped she'd made the right decision by choosing him as her accomplice. You okay? She asked as he caught himself. Arnold slid his beak to one side. Yeah, he said, just a little nervous. If you're too nervous, I could go, Thea said. No, Ava and Layla said at the same time. A half hour later, exactly as they had planned, they entered the rooftop disco. Ava had to admit that Miss Terpsichore had done a magnificent job. Sparkling disco balls zoomed overhead, lively music, probably in a multitude of languages, but sounding English to Ava, blared from invisible speakers. Tables heaped with plates of lasagna and raviolis. Ooh, that sounds good. Sugar dusted donuts. Oh, snap. And ricotta filled cannelloni. Oh, man, she's making me hungry. I haven't had dinner yet tonight. Were constantly replenished as if by invisible hands. A hot chocolate fountain burbled, that's a new word for me, burbled merrily in the center of the dance floor, jets of milk and chocolate obediently arcing into students' uplifted mugs. That would be cool. When I have a Christmas party here at my house, we always have hot cocoa, but I just put it in like a crock pot. And then I have like all the toppings that you can put on your hot cocoa. But a hot cocoa fountain would be cool, wouldn't it? All right. I got to find the spot now. Harlequins, jesters, plague doctors, and other carnival figures stood in little groups, eating or talking. A small contingent of cats danced together, their ball gowns swishing to the beat. The only person Avon recognized was Mr. Orion, who stood on a riser surveying the party. Even though he wore a creepy black mouthless mask and a ruffled 17th century suit, his hulking form was unmistakable. Since they had previously agreed that it was best to fan out so Mr. Orion wouldn't see them as a group, Ava immediately left the others and helped herself to some lasagna. As she nervously picked at it, she started to recognize some of the other students. The devil with 3 legs was obviously Arata, who'd grown an extra limb to show off on the dance floor. The tall harlequin had to be Lindawee. The jester leading a pack of cats is the in the Macarena, oh my gosh, had to be Matthias. And she easily recognized Jax, who was dressed in a mask similar to Arnold's, as he toasted the gods over hot chocolate with his friends. Enjoying yourself, Gorgon girl? A cold white face stared at her, then turned slightly, revealing a second face. Then the two-faced mask hissed in her ear. You're the biggest monster here. At least I don't act like one, Ava said. Both faces seemed to be glaring at her. What did you say? Ava stared down at her plate. It was the wrong night to antagonize Zale. It was bad enough that he was able to recognize her behind her mask. Nothing, she said. The two-faced mask loomed over her. That's what I thought. By 10 p.m., the dance floor was packed. Even Zale was out there, stomping around next to Anahita, whose constant whirling made her easy to identify behind her harlequin mask. Ava made sure both his faces were looking the other way before she slipped out of the ball and raced down the stairs to Mr. Orion's office. Arnold was supposed to meet her there, but the hallway was empty. Ava stood in the shadows waiting. Where was he? At last, she heard tiptoeing down the stairwell. Ava, are you there? A voice quivered. She could smell him in the darkness. He had to be sweating buckets. Someone really had to buy him some deodorant. Where are you? Where were you? Ava asked. Sorry, he said, but he didn't explain. Ava pulled out a set of lockpicks Fia had borrowed from Mr. Heff's workshop out of her pocket, then crouched beside the door. Oh my gosh, they're like picking the lock. Arnold pulled up his bird mask and watched her with his big blinking eyes. Maybe we shouldn't do this. Ava had similar doubts, but how many strikes was breaking into Mr. Orion's office worth? But she pushed them aside. She needed to understand what had happened to her mom at the academia. We'll be fine. Now I just have to. She placed her ear next to the lock, listening for the snap of the mechanism. Layla thinks it's a mistake, he whispered. Sophie, come here. Sophie, Sophie, come here. You don't need to be barking. We'll be fine. Now, Layla thinks it's a mistake, he whispered. Forget Layla. Don't you want to find out who you are? He nodded, then glanced back at the staircase. Zale once told me Mr. Orion kept monsters in his office. Maybe they protect it from intruders. You don't need to be afraid of monsters, Arnold. We are monsters. There! Ava turned the doorknob and gently pushed the door open. Come on. Arnold's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, Ava, I can't. His face scrunched like he was going to cry. I know, I'm acting like a chicken. I'm even dressed like one. Arnold, you're not. But he had already turned and was loping back down the hall. She heard him trip in the stairwell, probably over his cape again, and keep going. He even left her like, I think he could have at least like stayed the lookout, right? It was just as well, Ava thought with a sigh. Arnold was so nervous he'd probably be more of a liability than a help, and at least the air quality had improved. She would reassure him that it wasn't a big deal later. She could check out his file without him. But as she stepped into Mr. Orion's darkened office, she couldn't help but wishing she wasn't all alone. Girls, I'm reading. Hey, come in here. I'm reading. Come on, place. Stay in here. Sophie. No, no, you're staying. Put right here. Sorry. Chapter 20. Ava closed the door behind her, then switched on a small flashlight. She swept the beam across the office just in case Mr. Orion really did keep monsters there to protect school secrets. But nothing jumped out of the shadows or stirred in the corners. A row of glassy-eyed animal heads lined the walls. Orion, Ava reminded herself, had been a famous hunter. A giant club also hung on the wall, within easy reach. Ava shivered at the thought of Orion bashing some poor animal with it. There was a huge painting of the gods resting on their thrones in Olympus. Otherwise, the office could have been any school administrator's, with its leather armchair, giant oak desk, oriental rug, and stacks of paperwork. The only other decor was nature themed, a large conch shell on one side of the headmaster's desk, and a glass terrarium filled with moss and small green plants on the other. Mr. Orion had been having a problem with insects, or at least judging from the fly paper that lined the seams of the enormous windows overlooking the canal. The thought made her smile, especially as she'd also suffered her share of bites from the dreaded Venetian mosquitoes, or zanzare, during the first weeks of school. Demigods, they're just like us. Then she swung her light over to the filing cabinet. Yeah, like get on with it, girl, right? It was exactly where Fia had told her it would be, on the other side of the desk against the far wall. Then she swung her light through the door. Ava thought she heard the faint tread of footsteps. She kept as still as possible, listened. Silence. Had she just been imagining the sound? Still, she decided to turn off her flashlight. She knew where everything was, and there was just enough moonlight to help her navigate. She took careful, quiet steps. She had almost rounded the desk when there was a soft knock, and she froze. Ava, Fia whispered. Are you here? Ava dashed over to the open door. What's wrong? Someone's coming? No, Arnold just ran up the stairs, so I figured. Ava let out the breath she'd been holding. Then she pulled Fia into the office and closed the door behind her. He lost his nerve, but it's no big deal. You should go. What if Orion comes? He's busy at the ball. I thought you might need some help. Before Ava could argue, Fia dragged her over to the filing cabinet. They're here, she said, pulling open a drawer. The files are alphabetical. I'm not feeling good about this. I'm just going to tell you. Not feeling good about this. I know. I was just about to, but Fia's fingers were already briskly skimming over the A's and to the B's. She yanked out the file marked Baldwin and handed it to Ava. Then she held the flashlight over it so Ava could read. I can hold my own flashlight, Ava said. You should really leave. At least I have powers to protect you, Fia said. I don't need protection. You're the one with two strikes. Just read it, Fia whispered. Ava realized that the more she tried to get Fia to lead, the longer the mission would take. Fine, she said. Hold it still. Ava stared down at the file. The first document was a family tree with a single common ancestor written at the top in bold script. Medusa, Gorgon. At the tree's end was her mother, Melanie Williams Baldwin, followed by Jackson and Ava Baldwin. The behavior reports are after the ancestry ones, Fia said. Ava paged forward till she saw a document with her own name typed on top. Her eyes skimmed the scant entries. Single use of power, good self-control. Mother has prepared her well. They know everything, Ava said. Told you this police was creepy, Thea said. Anyway, you should see my report. It goes on for pages. But get to your mom's. Ava flipped forward until she spotted a page marked Melanie Williams. The top was full of comments. Ava skimmed as quickly as she could. Challenging student, back talks in class, used power inappropriately. Your mom was a first-class rebel, Fia said approvingly, looking over her shoulder. But this still doesn't explain what happened to her. Just then, two words at the very bottom of the page jumped out at Ava. Ran away. Ava turned the page. It was covered with writing, but every line had been blacked out. She turned to the next page and the next. They were exactly the same. Someone had run a heavy black marker over whatever had been written. Only on the final page could Ava read the writing. Student was located 48 hours later off the shore of Pavaglia. Student has been returned to the academia. Student will no longer be a problem. Student will be an example to others of proper behavior. What did they do to her? Fia asked. Ava slowly closed the folder, but her hands were shaking. I don't know. Then the office door swung open with a bang. Fia's going to get kicked out. She's going to get kicked out. What are we going to do? That's the end of chapter 20 and the end of your assignment for this week. OMG.